back in January 2019. The meta was still completely dominated by Gogeta, Bardock and Broly, even after all of the crazy units we got at the end of the previous year. Those three together were just that good. But we did have some pretty interesting units that month, including some from my favorite tag. But were they good enough to finally dethrone the Holy Trinity? Well, that's what you're going to find out in today's Legend History episode. The month of January started with a new Ultra Spacetime banner, this time focused entirely on the Future tag. This banner introduced 3 new Sparkins: Future Super Saiyan Gohan, Super Saiyan 2 Future Trunks, and Future Mai, alongside 2 new extreme units. At first glance, the lineup looked pretty alright, but when you looked closer, the color spread of the 3 new Sparkins perfectly countered the Holy Trinity. The new Yellow Future Gohan countered Purple Broly, Blue Trunks countered Red Gogeta, and Green Mai countered Blue Bardock. That new team was exactly what the meta needed, a team that could actually threaten the Holy Trinity while not being overly toxic. Also, fun fact, but when they first teased Future Gohan, many players including myself thought that he was going to be a one-armed Future Gohan, which I'm pretty sure would have been a first for a mobile game, as even Dokkan didn't have a one-armed Future Gohan at the time.
It looks like the next banner that's going to be dropping on the game is actually in fact going to be almost looking like another Hybrid Saiyans mix right here. So it's going to be Future Gohan. Now, please note, Legends did it right here. Future Gohan only has 1 freaking arm. So, mad props to them to getting that right on the first try.
So yeah, as bad as it sounds, we were pretty disappointed to see that he had both his arms. Anyways, the 3 new units were actually pretty solid. Like, not in meta break-in, but they definitely had potential. Future Gohan was probably the one with the most value. He could fit on 3 major tags: Hybrid Saiyans, Super Saiyans, and Future. His kit made him a reliable fighter who could hold his own on any of those teams, especially alongside Bardock's crit buffs. His Lucard slapped the enemy with a debuff that made them take 20% more strike damage. His main ability that he could use after 25 timer counts gave him his ultimate arts card. Literally nothing else. No heal, no utility, just his ultimate arts card. And how good was that ultimate? Well, it was actually pretty decent. Not only did it deal solid damage, but it also removed all of your opponent's buffs, in case they survived. His green cards then restored 10% of his health, gave him 20% strike damage for 20 timer counts, and cleansed him of all of his debuffs, if you had a Trunks as a battle member. So a very good green card. As for his unique abilities, the first one gave him 40% strike damage for the whole battle if you had a Future Saga tag ally, which coupled with his Z ability, which gave 26% strike damage to the Future tag. Yeah, you can guess that his strike cards were doing some pretty decent damage. Then his second unique ability is really what made that guy pretty cracked. When Gohan died, he gave some insane buffs to his allies. 30% strike damage, 35% key recovery, card draw speed, and even more damage if they were from the Future tag. Like, this was just insane. And what really made him fit so well on so many teams, even though he had some pretty heavy Future Saga tag restrictions. Blue's percentile Trunks was basically the range counterpart to Gohan, and another pretty solid unit. He was a range type unit. His blue cards debuffed the enemy's key recovery by 20% for 20 timer counts. His main ability then gave 20% damage to all allies and cleansed the debuffs of your entire team, which was just like, this was crazy. Then his green card was pretty simple. It just gave 20% blast damage for 20 timer counts, but since his whole kit already gave him like a ton of blast damage, yeah, after some green cards that guy could look pretty disgusting. His Z ability gave 26% blast defense to the Future tag, which was actually pretty decent as it helped the whole team tank better, and the Future tag had like a lot of glass cannons at the time. His first unique ability was his bread and butter. Every time Trunks entered the battlefield, he got 40% blast damage for 10 timer counts, restored his own health by 10%, and got 20 ki whenever he evaded an attack with a vanishing step. Like, this was pretty crazy, as you could switch him out, vanish, get some ki back, and just demolish the enemy with his blast cards. Like, combined with Future Gohan's support, this guy could genuinely be an absolute monster. His second unique ability was a last man standing ability, giving him ki recovery and blast damage for each downed ally, and additional buffs for downed ally from the Future Saga tag. So yeah, that guy was clearly meant to be run alongside future Gohan. Like, this was literally one of the best duos in the game. And then there was Mai, who ended up being the most interesting unit of the three, even though she was technically the weakest unit. Stat-wise, her green card was absolutely insane. It stunned the enemies, destroyed 2 of their cards, and reduced their card draw speed by 1 for 10 timer counts. That might not sound too crazy on paper, but if she pulled 2 green cards back to back, she could literally lock the opponent out of their hand and keep them stuck for an entire combo. Like, you've got to understand, like, people quickly realized how busted that was. Like, bro, she could literally just lock you out. Like, you literally couldn't do anything if you just pulled 2 green cards back to back. Like, it was crazy. The only reason why she wasn't like a top tier unit was because of how unreliable it was to draw like multiple green cards consistently. But even then, she was easily one of the most annoying support type units in the game when used correctly. Her main ability and one of her unique abilities also gave damage to the whole team. So if you were willing to pull all of the 3 new units, their buffs combined together could become pretty ridiculous very quickly. As for the 2 new extreme units, they were, as you would guess, nothing game changing, but their Z abilities were pretty insane for a time. Like, they were for sure some of the best bench units for the Android tag. Altogether, the banner was pretty good, but none of the new units were really like Z tier units like Broly or Kaioken Goku, at least like alone. But if you were able to pull all of the 3 new units, yeah, that was like a completely different story. Like, their synergy was just so insane that they were actually able to rival the Holy Trinity. But the problem was that literally no one still had current crystals after the crazy banners they released at the end of the previous year, and there were still a bunch of units from the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie who were missing, like Super Saiyan God Vegeta or Gogeta Blue, who were definitely on the way. So unless we were like a Future Saga stan like me, yeah, this banner was a hard skip. The banner also released with a bunch of small updates, a new login campaign that lasted several weeks, giving out a total of 17 tickets, 2 guaranteed sparking summons and 3 regular summons if they logged in every day, a brand new PvP season with the rerun of the Extreme Yellow Trunks and the unique Hybrid Saiyan Gold equip, as well as your typical Scout Battle event for the farmable extreme unit. The book 8 of the part 2 of the horror mode was added, officially wrapping up part 2 of the story and setting up part 3. A week later, and Legends got a new Master Packs banner. It came with double sparking and extreme rates, given a 10% sparking chance per pull instead of the usual 5%. And the pull was pretty massive, featuring dozens of characters from the game's first 6 months. But the only true top tier unit in the banner was Super Saiyan Bardock. So if you didn't have him yet, this was a great chance to pull him for free using the free tickets they gave out. Because yeah, since most of the units in there were already power crept, the general advice was to just summon using the free tickets. Like, those Master Packs banners weren't going away anytime soon. Like, they're still in game to this day. They also brought back the Legends Road Kid Goku event, which now included EX battles 5 and 6, as well as a second challenge battle. Players could once again farm Legends Road medals and exchange them for various rewards. But the big difference this time was that everything in the event had been updated for the new level 2000 cap. If you wanted to clear the hardest stages, you pretty much had to have a full Legends Road team, maxed out to 2000, since the event was actually pretty difficult, at least compared to the original release, which was already pretty hard, if you remember, so yeah. This was bad. Farming this event was also worth it, because they added Masters Pack 2 tickets to the exchange shop. You could grind those for free summons on the new banner, and I'm sure a lot of players pulled Super Saiyan Bardock from those free tickets. The update also introduced 2 brand new equipments. The first one was designed for Dragon Ball Saga characters. It gave up to 15% blast defense, 18% strike attack, and up to 10% strike defense for Dragon Ball Saga battle member, meaning you could stack up to 30% total strike defense if you run a full Dragon Ball Saga team. Like, it definitely didn't make like the tag meta or anything, but it was still good to have in case that tag actually got some decent premium units in the future. The second new equipment gave up to 15% strike defense, 20% blast attack, and a conditional 30% strike damage against Saiyans for 40 timer counts. That might not sound like much, but considering most of the meta was made up of Saiyan units, Kaioken Goku, the Holy Trinity, the new Future Saga units, this equipment was basically made to give yellow units, especially Legends Road Kid Goku, a chance in this meta. The update also added new Charlotte upgrade missions, which were mostly just free rewards. Like, all you had to do was fully soul boost Charlotte, unlock 300 boost panels, and raise him to level 2000, something most players had already done anyways. Then came something interesting. A new character usage ranking chart was released, showing the most and least used characters in the current PvP season. the top 3 were exactly what you'd expect. Super Saiyan Bardock, Purple Broly, and Super Gogeta. What a surprise. The Holy Trinity was still running the game. But what is surprising is that the blue legendary Super Saiyan Broly was still being used by some players for fun, I guess, so he unfortunately likely wouldn't get a balance change anytime soon. So yeah, that unfortunately meant that he would remain completely outdated for quite some time, or so we thought. As part of the Broly movie's US release, we also had a new Logate bonus campaign themed around the film's worldwide debut. The rewards were actually not that bad, like players could collect up to 700 Chrono Crystals, along with like your typical skip tickets, Zenny, and training items. Players even speculated that the event might be teasing the upcoming release of Super Saiyan Blue Gogeta, predicting that he'd likely arrive once the movie finished premiering globally, because by that point like the movie would have been released like everywhere. Well, little did they know, bro, little did they know. But yeah, the game was clearly building up to something big. They also added a new event centered around future Trunks. It came with some new equipments, but only one of them is really worth going over, as it was just completely cracked. It gave up to 25% blast and strike defense, 25% blast and strike attack, and even base health, all in one single equipment. It was genuinely the best equipment Legends had ever released to date. But there was one catch: only green extreme class units could use it, which was actually kind of disappointing, and at first most players thought that it was too restrictive to be worth farming, since the only decent character who could use that equip at the time was the new Extreme Android 17. But after some quick calculations, players realized just how broken it actually was. Even with an average roll, this equip basically turned any green extreme unit into essentially a sparking unit, at least stat wise. Like, the stats were just so insane that it literally completely erased the usual gap between rarities. So while that equipment was technically restricted, it was just a matter of time before they released an extreme class unit that could actually make the best out of it. A few days later, new VJump Leaks dropped, and this time they confirmed that Kel and Caulifla were coming to Legends. The translations revealed some early details about how both characters were going to play. Kel was described as a disruptive type unit who could destroy the opponent's hand and interrupt combos, and Caulifla was described as your typical offensive unit. But what was really interesting about her kit was that she gained damage every time the enemy switched out, as long as there was another female character on her team. So essentially, the more you swapped against her, the stronger she got. It was, I guess, a pretty clever way to try and counter not only the Holy Trinity, who relied on Bardock's swap support, but also the new Future Saga team. The scans didn't mention exactly when Kel and Caulifla were going to release, but considering the pattern of previous VJump Leaks, yeah, we knew they were coming soon, probably within the next month. Not long after Kel and Caulifla VJump Leaks, we got another Legends Rising banner, this time featuring Final Form Cooler, Zamasu, and Bojack. Zamasu and Bojack immediately caught everyone's attention, not just because they looked incredible, but because both of them were designed to directly counter the Super Saiyan meta, which at the time was still completely dominated by the Holy Trinity. Blue Final Form Cooler was a melee type unit, and he was clearly made to be run on the Lineage of Evil team. On that tag, Cooler not only had more damage and key recovery, but the cost of his strike and blast cards were also reduced. Then when he swapped out, he granted additional buffs to all Lineage of Evil allies, more damage and critical rate. So this guy was essentially just the Super Saiyan Bardock of the Frieza clan. He also had blast armor on his strike cards, letting him power through blast arts just like Broly, which as you would guess made him pretty terrifying in PvP. Like, that alone made him one of the most annoying units to face at the time. With Cooler, the Lineage of Evil tag could finally stand a chance against the Holy Trinity. Zamasu was a defensive type unit and came with the God Key, Future, and Regeneration tags, which was a pretty big deal, as it finally gave all three of those teams a true defensive wall. Beerus was still seen as underwhelming at the time, but pairing him with Zamasu and Red Spurs and God Goku suddenly made the God Key team at the very least viable. On Future, he could tank hits for Goku Black or Trunks, and on Regen, he provided the sustain and durability the team had been lacking. He wasn't a heavy damage dealer, but his survivability and attack flexibility made him one of the most valuable additions Legends had seen in months. Like, the guy was honestly pretty disgusting. His main ability restored all of your team's health, health by 25%, while also cleansing them of all of their debuffs. Then one of his unique abilities gave him additional damage against Saiyan or Hybrid Saiyan tag units, which were most of the meta at the time, but what really made that guy cracked was his Immortal Body ability. He restored 10% of the damage he received after an enemy's attack was over, while not only having a 40% damage reduction cover change ability, but endurance. Like, brother, the guy was extremely tanky, had sustainability, and then endurance. This was just ridiculous. Facing him genuinely felt like facing a final boss. He took forever to die, and once he died, he just came back to life. Like, this guy single-handedly brought back the regen tag into the meta, and you can guess that the team was ridiculous with him. Yellow Bojack was a range type fighter who got stronger the longer he stayed on the field, similar to Yellow Super Vegeta. His blast damage increased with timer counts, and he dealt extra damage against Super Saiyans, which made him an instant threat to the Holy Trinity. But what made him stand out was his comeback mechanic. When both of his allies were defeated, Bojack restored a large portion of his health and gained massive blast damage buffs, essentially transforming him into a last man standing nuke. He even had a barrier type green card, like Android 17's, that could block almost everything in the game. Like, this was just a nasty thing to have on such a crazy damage dealer, so he was an incredible Super Saiyan counter. Overall, this new banner was one of the most stacked banners the game had ever seen. Bojack, Zamasu, and Cooler all filled critical holes in the meta, and each helped their tags significantly. The banner also featured the limited time 999 Z-Power per pull bonus. With those new characters and the previous ones we got earlier that month, yeah, the meta was actually starting to look pretty diverse. Like, the Holy Trinity was still insane, but not as dominant as it was a month ago. We also got a new PvP season that same day. The season introduced a new event limited equipment piece designed specifically for Extreme Frieza Force units. At first glance, it didn't look like much. It gave up to 18% strike defense, strike and blast damage per Frieza Force member, but in practice, it was actually pretty cracked. This new equip turned Green Extreme Ludoria into an absolute monster. Players quickly realized that if you run a Frieza Force team with Yellow Final Form Frieza, Green Ludoria, and one of the other Frieza Force character, Ludoria could literally buff Frieza to the point of one comboing Purple Broly, the most dominant unit in the game at the time. It was yet another example of how little by little the game was starting to balance itself out, by giving more value to old units and creative team building, instead of just relying on new releases alone. Outside of the new equipment, Masters Pack 2 tickets were added to the PvP rewards, alongside the Masters Pack 1 tickets, meaning players could finally earn summons on newer characters like Super Saiyan Bardock, who at that point was still one of the most valuable units in the game. Legends also received another story update, with some new chapters. The newly added Chapter 8, Book 2 of the Part 3 became known as one of the best stages in the game to farm EXP. At the very end of January, Legends dropped another Ultra Spacetime banner featuring Super Saiyan 2 Caulifla, Super Saiyan Kel in her Berserk form, and Super Saiyan Kaba. Caulifla was the main highlight, and her kit really showed how much Legends had evolved in terms of character design at that point. She was a purple melee type unit with a very aggressive playstyle, built entirely around keeping pressure on the opponent. Her main ability restored 50k on activation, boosted her strike damage by 40% for 15 timer counts, and even cleansed her of all of her debuffs, meaning that things like paralysis or reduced defenses didn't slow her down. Her green cards also gave her an extra 20% strike damage boost, and obviously stacked very well with her main ability. Then her first unique ability gave her a massive 40% strike damage increase, specifically against Saiyans, which at the time was basically the entire PvP meta. Combine that with her second unique ability, which restored her ki by 30 and granted her up to 45% strike damage every time an enemy swapped characters. And you literally had a unit that punished one of the core defensive mechanics of the game. If you switched out to survive, she literally just got stronger. That made her just insane when paired with like other female fighters, because every tag switch basically made her hit harder and harder. And since her Z ability boosted female warriors tag unit strike attack by 26%, she was pretty much a must for that tag. Kel was a red defensive type unit. Her main ability granted her 10% more damage every time she was attacked, and she debuffed enemies by making them take 10% more damage every time she used a card. Her special move inflicted the enemy with 5 substitution count on hit, which could literally lock your opponent's strongest unit out and they were just dead. Her green card healed her for 15% of her health, boosted her blast damage by 15%, which was a pretty decent green card for a tank. But the real star of her kit was her cover change. When switching in, Kel destroyed 2 of your opponent's cards, buffed her own damage by 30% for 15 timer counts, and increased her substitution count by 2. So you had to be careful with that cover change. But it was pretty nasty. Like, you could completely shut down one of your enemy's combos by basically destroying their hand and still rerun later to tank another hit. Like, her defensive stats were high enough to absorb pretty big hits, but her ability to apply constant debuffs meant that she could dish out some serious punishment in extended fights, especially paired with Caulifla and Kaba. And talking about Kaba, he was the glue that held it all together. He was a green support type unit and arguably the most underrated of the three. His main ability healed him by 35% and cleansed allies of all of their debuffs, effectively giving the team a free reset mid-fight. His green card boosted the whole team's inflicted damage by 25% for 30 timer counts, and his unique ability gave a 40% strike damage boost to both Vegeta and Universe 6 allies whenever he switched out, which made him the perfect partner for other Universe 6 units and for Vegeta units. But I guess what made Kaba especially valuable was his Z ability. Instead of boosting attack stats like most characters, his Z ability gave green units max health. This gave him so much value as a bench unit on many teams, since Z abilities given HP were pretty scarce at the time. The banner also brought back a few strong returning units, like Super Vegeta and Perfect Cell, both of which were surprisingly still pretty decent, and there was even a new red Extreme Caulifla added to the pool, who had a decent Z ability for the red color. Honestly, for most players, this banner was literally just the first real step towards the inevitable arrival of Kefla, which everyone was very eager to see in Legends, and an obvious skip with the anticipated release of Super Saiyan Blue Gogeta. But yeah, this is it for today's video. In the next history episode, we'll go over the release of the second banner from the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie collab. But until then, take care, peace.